So, Chad, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. And thank you so much for taking part in this interview today. Very happy to have you here. And you are the COO of Doc Johnson. For those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us about Doc Johnson, please?
Yeah, definitely. We are 47-year-old sex toy company,
Uh-huh.
one of the oldest, one of the largest US manufacturers of sex toys. Um, but I sort of like hone in on that word manufacturer because I think the most important thing to know about us and about, Doc Johnson and what we do here is that we are actually manufacturers of product. Behind me here, this is my office, but right over to the side of me here is 250,000 square feet of manufacturing facility. So
Wow.
we still make over 60% of all of the products in our catalog, which is about 1,600 items total. We still make about 60% of that product here in Los Angeles.
Wow.
Um, and it's a process that we've sort of been doing since 1976. We kind of opened our doors day one as a true manufacturer. And, if this is a place that you ever come to, you will see the product being created from, initial concept all the way through to actual production of the product.
So, are you also distributing your products, or are you just purely based on manufacturing and you have different brands?
So our main brand is Doc Johnson. That's
Mhm.
sort of like that's the company. And then, over the last, I would say probably 10 years, maybe a little bit more than that, we've kind of, you know, started these sort of sub brands that I think speak specifically to different categories and different sectors in the market. Doc Johnson as a whole is kind of this really large entity, and we manufacture product in almost every category in the industry, for every one. And so it's kind of hard to do that and not sort of like segregate brands, to market those brands specifically towards the clientele that we think we're making that product for.
Mhm. So, you're distributing worldwide or basically mostly US?
Worldwide, everywhere. US is our largest, but we are do a massive business in Europe and Canada, Australia. Um, yeah, you can find Doc Johnson pretty much on every corner of the planet.
I first heard about you. Well, I've kind of known you from I've seen you around in the sector previously, but I read the book Buzz: The Stimulating History of the Sex Toy by
Ah,
Halley
sure. It's
Braverman.
right there on my little bookshelf.
Yeah, I really believe everyone in our sector should read it. It's just so interesting, and I learned some things that I just
Yeah,
couldn't
she did a great job.
imagine. Sorry,
I said she did a great job.
it was amazing, an incredible book.
Yeah,
And I was really
yeah.
surprised about the term marital aids. Is that how you started? The company started
Ah,
with that? Could you tell us about
yeah. If you look at our 1976 catalog, it is a picture of a couple on a beach, like at sunset, and the front of it just says Doc Johnson marital aids.
that? Okay.
Uh, and that's I people always ask me about the industry or what the product is, and I said we went from marital aids to adult novelties to sex toys to sort of I would say that the evolution currently right now is pleasure products.
That was one of my questions further on, actually, about the language about these products. I think something else that surprised me about the term marital aids, from what I read in Buzz, the stimulating history of the sex toy, was about that they were hollow dildos for married couples. I just thought that was such a strange. That's not what a lot of people would not think of that. The strap-on dildos being for heterosexual married women. It was just the married couples. It's very people think of that as maybe more kind of for pegging or for lesbian sex. And I don't know.
Yeah, I think back then, a lot of it was also about I don't want to say like covering up what the mass of the product was about, but I think we were
Mm.
trying to legitimatize the business.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, if you go back to the mid 70s when sort of the pleasure products category was really starting to evolve, and sort of grow out of the magazine, and film, and sort of like the peep show sections of like the stores, where like stores started to actually create areas for product. Um, it was an industry that was highly regulated, and it was an industry that was highly targeted by all sides of government. There was not really two sides on this as there
Hmm.
are kind of today. This was something where, really speaking, the U.S. government was out to, try to take down the adult industry as a whole. And so, sex toys or adult novelties became marital aids to begin with, because that sounds like something that people need to, help, whether it's, their sex life or their marriage, or, even more like medically kind of speaking in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting. The same kind of stuff is still happening today with the terminology. I think people want to move away from the term sex toy. It sounds trivial, but potentially, and the word sex can be problematic in social media. But also, there's the words like, for example, pleasure product, as you said, and sexual wellness device. I mean, do you have any favorites, or that you, or does the company have any terms?
I don't want to sit here and like brag and say that I feel like I was like ahead of the curve on that, but I'll say
Mhm.
that as someone who grew up in the business, I mean, this is my family's business. So like I
Mhm.
started in this industry before I started in this industry, and so
Mhm.
I think that I had a vision of, or at least an idea of what I thought was going to happen here. And I said early on, even before I started working at the company, like, I don't know why you call them sex toys. It makes it sound um like lesser than,
Mhm.
like I hear the word toy and I kind of just think cheap.
Okay.
And so there was this idea of like, well, what else would they be called? And that's kind of where, I mean, for us, it's sort of Doc Johnson American Pleasure Products. Pleasure products is definitely sort of like a connotation that I think has been like pretty adapted.
Mhm.
Um, on one hand, yes, it gets you away from the word sex, but I don't think that, to me, it's never been more about the sex part of it as much as the toy part of it. And I know when I was growing up and I ever heard my dad say like adult novelties to somebody, whenever I said that, I just always felt like that was led into more questions. People never understood what adult novelties were, and then I think the word novelty in some ways is I don't want to say it's worse than the word toy, but I think novelty, like the true definition of it, is like not something to be taken seriously.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
so as this industry has grown up and become a lot more serious, and the product has become a lot more, or I should say, the product has become better and more mainstream, I feel like the terminology surrounding the industry has to as well.
definitely, definitely. So you have over 2,500 products. You're currently selling over 2,500 products. Is that correct? About 100
Yeah,
new ones a
we've
day.
scaled down a little bit. We always try to kind of like, always sort of always curating the line, trying to make sure that it's like, even though it's a huge line, we're always trying to make sure that it's, the right amount of products. I would say right now we're probably sitting at about 1,600, somewhere between 16 and 1,700 products.
Wow. And how many brands is that?
Uh, I mean, probably over 20 brands without
Wow.
counting exactly. I would say that's probably throughout 20 major brands. We still have some product that, does really well, that I would say is sort of like branded on its own. Like it might just be a couple of items that sort of like share the same name, but they were never kind of like built into a big brand. They were never sort of marketed as a brand. They're just kind of like units that kind of stand on their own. And then from there, I would say that there's 20 pretty big brands within the Doc Johnson. We've started calling it the House of Doc.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of
Cool.
like within the House of Doc, there's 20 brands that, let's just say that there's 20 rooms in the House of Doc that kind of have their own little story.
What about best-selling products? What's your best-selling product? And do you have a bestseller over the last few years that's been that sells way more than
Yes.
anything else?
So also something that we break down based on category a little bit because we do have so many products. And sometimes I always ask like, well, are you asking about revenue? Are you asking about volume? Um, there's different sort of ways to look at that question. So I kind of give that answer and I say that, I'll give you like the top five in different categories as well as sort of like a mixture of revenue and volume. One of
Okay.
our biggest brands, is a brand of ours called Good Head, which is a line just basically all around, personal care and cosmetics for oral sex. It's
Okay.
just like an oral sex enhancing brand. It's something that I think we do really well. That kind of like a corner that Doc Johnson kind of carved out for itself. That I don't really think anyone else is kind of playing in that on that corner at all. So um, we have some of our top selling items in the whole company come from that Good Head brand. And then as a brand, I would say it's probably like the number one overall volume brand. But it's a much more inexpensive line of product. It's all sprays and lotions and potions and things like that. So the price point way lower versus something like our Vaculock sex machine, which retails for over $750.
Wow.
That's one of our top revenue generators in the whole company, but nowhere near the volume of Good Head, oral sex gel.
This is like a blowjob simulator or something like this?
The Good Head or the sex
Yeah,
machine?
both. Good head sounds
Oh,
like
so the
a
sex,
blowjob.
I mean, the sex machine is a traditional sort of like like a penetration machine that you
Okay.
can apply different attachments onto.
Hmm.
Whereas the Good Head line is yeah, it's lotions and gels and different types of product, but it's all around enhancing oral play. So
Okay.
it's flavored, or we have a product in that line called Juicy Head, which activates the salivatory glands.
Oh, wow.
Um, so it's like, for sloppier blowjobs or wetter head, things like that. Um, and then some products that also do really well for us are our Pocket Rocket, which is kind of one of the number one selling vibrators pretty much in the history of the industry. Kind of feel like every woman I've ever talked to said that like a Pocket Rocket was one of the first items they ever bought. Um, so that's just kind of one of those like sort of beginner items, sort of like it's the sort of like the gateway into like the or into the pleasure products industry.
Definitely. I've just been to I was just at the Aerospain Fair. Did you hear of the Aerospain Fair? It was like
Yeah, I
Aerofame.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
How
hosting,
was
I
it?
was the MC at the gala. It was a fantastic experience to see this because I'm living in Barcelona. It's just amazing to have this on my doorstep. And I always go to Aerofame every year. And I think in general, I don't know what the percentage would be, but I'd say most sex toys are for female stimulation. I think there's definitely the male sex toy categories growing a lot, as is the couples one. What's your experience on which is the most popular
Yeah, I think
category or how things
I
have
think the
changed?
pendulum swings. I think the pendulum swings a lot, like
Mm.
if you look back at the beginning of the industry, it was not necessarily made for men, but it was definitely men buying the
Okay.
products,
Mhm.
and so a lot of stuff was marketed and strictly towards men,
Mhm.
and the male buyer. And then obviously that did last for quite a while, but there was a massive turning point, and sort of when the pendulum really swung in the other direction was um, you know, there was a few tipping points here, right? Obviously the introduction of the internet, um, as e-commerce became bigger, realizing that you could go online and not have to go into a store to buy a vibrator, brought a lot more women to the category. The sort of mainstream tipping points like Sex in the City discussing vibrators,
Mhm.
on this massive show for women sitting around a table discussing their vibrators. Um, that sort of swung the pendulum all the way in the other direction, which was like women are the only buyers, everything's for women, you know, 10,000 vibrators every year coming into the market from all these different companies. Um, everything, kind of all about the woman buyer. And realizing that that is really where the purchasing power was. Um, and then I think when that happens, you do start to leave gaps in the market, which I think one of the gaps in the market was what's a male product outside of a masturbator? It feels like, we're very big in that category. There's a few other companies that are pretty big in that category, but outside of that, what are you making for men? And that's when I think people realize like, well, how many vibrators or female products can the market bear every year? And anyone that's running a good business has to look at where the gaps in the market are. We developed a line probably like 6 or 7 years ago called Optimal, which is a whole line just based solely around men's sexual health and wellness. And it's not about sexual orientation. It's we make product for kind of everybody within this line, but everybody male orientated in the sense of, we're not just going to make a stroker or like a lubricant in that line for like traditional masturbation purposes. We make butt plugs and cock rings and vibrating cock rings and prostate massagers um, and different personal care and cosmetics. It's a really big, all-encompassing line for men's sexual health and wellness. And we built that line and developed that line really specifically because one day we were going over product and going over sort of the different, development that we wanted to do in the company as we do every year. And one of the things that was brought up was like, when's the last time someone built a brand for men? Like where is the male product now? It's just not around. Everything was being solely focused on just the female buyer. And then you had companies come out like WeVibe, who obviously were focusing on the couples, and that became a different part of the pendulum that swung towards, oh yeah, how do we make product for people to use together? Where it's one product that is really for both people, not necessarily a pocket rocket that a woman would feel comfortable using in the bedroom with a partner, but how do we make a product for partners, and trying to capture that market as well.
So what about the app control products? Are you working on that at the moment? Do you have any app control products?
We don't at the moment, but it is something that we are very sort of like in the middle of right now.
Okay, interesting. So I
That's the
think
most I can say. That's the
okay,
most
good.
I can say. Hopefully, I'll have really interesting stuff to divulge in the next couple of months.
Because I read also that your company just boomed with the pandemic, and I think a lot of people would assume that was because also there's a lot of long distance control. But why do you think the sector boomed in the pandemic?
I think I look at it in I think there's two kind of people that were out there in the pandemic, right? You were either um, alone,
Hmm.
you lived alone or you didn't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner. And you know, we were all kind of locked up and, at some point in time, I mean, I think the numbers back up that most people at this point own toys, and are using these products. And so why not get more and explore different, things that you maybe weren't exploring before or didn't have the time to or weren't looking up online and kind of finding. And then I think on the flip side of that, you had people that were together and they got locked up together and Maybe pleasure products were not a part of their relationship and they became a part, or maybe they were and they evolved into more categories as well. I don't want to say out of boredom, but like, look, we were all in this like moment. It was like the first time that any of us had gone through anything like this. And we were all doing things that we had never sort of like expected to do, getting into different games, into different TV shows, or reading, or whatever it was. And I think the this industry saw a massive, and it wasn't just our company; it was every company, just saw a massive explosion because you had a lot of people locked up looking to have fun, and I think that's what we do. I mean, anyone that's never used a product before that does, or uses a new one in a different category. I mean, sure, I've had people say to me like, I didn't love that one, but I did love this one. It's not like I don't like these things at all.
Mm,
There's always going to be something out there that someone's going to love, and it's going to greatly enhance their sex life, whether it's solo play or with a partner.
definitely. I mean, 2020 was the best year of my career. It was incredible. And
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
podcasting too, right? I mean, and all that. Like, there's how many podcasts were created during the pandemic because that's another thing. People were home listening to this stuff, going on these walks because that's all we could do.
Mm.
Going on 2-hour walks a day. It's like, what are you gonna listen to?
Also, I think it's responsible for the sector becoming more mainstream. That's my next question. So I read that you've mainstream enough for the Los Angeles magazine to call you the Procter and Gamble of sex toys. So I guess everyone knows you now.
Yeah,
Has that changed a lot for you, like personally and professionally? Like everyone kind of knows more about what your work is about.
I think. Well, look, yeah, I mean, I would say that it's it's changed the it's changed the temperature of the conversation. I don't, again, I grew up in this business. I grew up before the internet. My dad did not tell me what he did, and he did not tell people who he did not know what he did, especially people at my school, or friends of mine, parents, and things like that. This was not an opening um, uh, dialogue of conversation that was ever had. My dad was an importer exporter. My dad did health and beauty products. I don't know, any number of stories, medical devices. There was always a bunch of stories floating around of like what my dad did, and a lot of that was to shield me specifically from any judgment, or to have any parents tell their kids like, oh well, you can't hang out with Chad, and can't go over to Chad's house because it's going to be Caligula over there. um but I don't have that benefit. If it is a benefit at all, I don't know, but I don't even have that choice, right? I mean, if you just Google me, you're going to find out what I do. You're going to find the LA Magazine, you're going to find the New York Times article. And we've been very lucky to have probably 10 times the exposure and editorial that any company in this industry has ever had. Um,
Mm.
that New York Times article that was written about us, I cannot tell you how big the New York Times is. I mean, I didn't know. And I live here, and obviously I know the New York Times is the New York Times. But when that article came out, I mean, I was getting text messages. I haven't changed my number since high school. I was getting text messages from people I have never spoken to, you
Wow.
know, that just took a chance that my number was still the same number. And they were like, dude, I saw you in the New York Times. Like, like, oh my God, like stuff like that. And getting calls from producers and people that wanted to do reality shows and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that on one hand, I don't have that choice. And then on the other hand, it's okay because people love what I do now. I'm not getting judged. I don't think my kids are getting judged. I mean, I just went through a whole situation, with my 5-year-old. He's starting kindergarten, and we're looking at a lot of schools, and I'm saying like every one of these schools is going to Google me.
Mm.
Every one of these schools is going to make a decision as to whether or not they're okay with a someone from the adult industry, being a part of their community. And no one's going to tell me that they didn't accept my son because of this, you know. But I was genuinely, it's the first time in my life where I was like, okay, I'm a hit at dinner parties. Um, I'm a great uh um single serving friend on like an airplane. People love finding out what I do. They want to talk to me about it. People share intimate details with me that I don't think that they would ever share with somebody else, because of what I do. And they think like I'm like sort of a judgment free zone. But this was sort of the first time where I was like, huh, I wonder what's going to happen here, And I mean, we applied to 5 different schools, and my son got into all 5.
Oh, amazing.
you know, and it was like, I think he's deserving of it, but he's also only 5. So it was interesting for me to know that like every single one of those schools Googled me, found out what I did, and accepted us anyways. So I think that was a very cool moment for me, knowing sort of where my childhood came from, uh, and what was kind of hidden from me, and then now to know that 35 years later, um, we're in a place where this is very accepted and very mainstream, and it's a business.
Absolutely. And that's probably what the number
And
one
for me
reaction I get.
personally,
Yeah.
the thing that I've always felt and why I've been very such a champion of this industry or my company, really is that like we're, as a manufacturer, like we're job creators, you
Definitely.
know, and not just the industry as a whole, which is a massive industry, but like we are job creators ourselves. Like we employ 250 people in Los Angeles making product, and so when someone talks to me about whether or not my business is legitimate enough for them, I want them to show me other companies in LA that are supporting 250 families.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the reaction I get most is probably the people confessing their secrets, which is probably not what people expect. They would probably expect there's more judgment, but it's not. If people are judging, they're not really sharing that. But speaking of the 250 families that you're supporting, so you actually manufacture most of it in the US, whereas a lot of companies are producing in China. So why is it important for you to kind of keep control of that manufacturing and do it locally?
Um, Listen, I can point towards the quality control that you
Mhm.
can retain by having the process under your roof and under your eye every single day is second to none. It's not comparable. I also think that when you're hands on with a product, when you really understand how a product is made and how it goes from conception to final in your hand, consumer ready. I just think it brings a sort of there's a knowledge that's gained with that you just don't get at other places. And I think there's a level of expertise, that you get by working here and working in this particular way than by making something on your computer and just kind of sending it off to a factory overseas and then just receiving the product in a final package and not really ever touching it. And I don't really want to like speak badly about what anyone else does, but there's a lot of companies in our industry that aren't even designing the product.
Mhm.
They're just buying stuff that's ready made from China and
Mhm.
putting it in a package and just selling it.
Would you say it's a faster process
And
as well for you?
Oof, I don't know. It could be a much longer process. Our process is
Mm,
super intensive, super labor intensive, and it's a lot of work to get from A to Z.
mm,
Um, I think that it's a faster process when we need more product. Like I would say that we're as close to a just-in-time manufacturer as you can get. And of course, our MOQs and a lot of the stuff that does affect other companies doesn't affect us, which makes us more nimble. Um, and we are able to turn around product a lot quicker. If I'm out of stock on something, if I have the components needed for it, I can make it for you very, very quickly. Whereas if my competitors are out of stock, they're waiting, 60 to 90 days for more product to be put onto a container and shipped over.
absolutely. And also shipping was
So,
very expensive in the pandemic as well. It's very complicated to
uh,
ship things.
I know. I mean, listen, we still
Yeah.
ship a lot of product. I'm not sitting here saying we make 100% of our own product. We don't. All of our electronics and, all of our vibrating product, things like that, they do come from our factories overseas. And I mean, we dealt with the same logistic nightmares that everybody did, and containers were 7 times the cost that they are normally. But like, I'll tell you that was another reason why our company, why Doc Johnson, I think probably did a little bit better than the other companies did, even though we all did well, is
Mhm.
because when people were really truly out of stock, and China was shut down, we were manufacturing product,
Amazing.
and we were making product. So that is to our benefit. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But there's two sides to every coin, and there's the side of what it takes to really maintain a manufacturing operation versus a warehouse full of just corrugated boxes.
Definitely. So going back to the mainstreamness of our industry and how that's developed lately, what do you think about sex toys being sold in supermarkets and more kind of mainstream outlets? Are you being sold in more kind of not just sex shops, but all more mainstream outlets like supermarkets and
Yeah.
pharmacies?
I mean, so here in the US, it's not supermarkets yet.
Mm,
It's not sort of like what we call C stores either, which are like convenience stores. But yeah, I mean, they are being sold in the Walmarts and the Targets and the Rite Aids and the Walgreens, of the
mm.
world.
Do you think that's a good
Um,
thing for our
and-
sector? Do you think it's a good thing? Because I mean, I guess recently I went to a hardware store here in Barcelona. I was going to buy a bikini trimmer, and then suddenly in the same aisle, I saw lots of sex toys, and I was really surprised. I thought it was a really cool thing because, it's
what's a
getting to,
bikini trimmer?
just for like pubic hair trimmer. I was just
Oh,
looking for
oh, okay,
intimate
okay.
grooming device. And anyway, I was so surprised to see a lot of sex toys in this shop, which is like where you would buy like hair dryers and things. And I thought it was so impressive. And I made a reel for Instagram. And then to my surprise, a lot of people who own sex shops felt like it was a stab in the back, and I just don't agree with that. I think it's like making it more accessible to someone who's not going to set foot into a sex shop. I think it's making it
Yeah,
more available, and then different people have different ideas of it. And I was recently on a TV debate in the UK on GB News, which is like the British Fox News. It's very right wing. And I was on a debate with this woman who just found it very awkward to have those conversations with maybe children in a shop. Because a lot of now in England, a lot of like Boots Chemist and supermarkets, they're selling more and more toys. And I think that's a good thing,
sure.
but I mean, not everyone's happy about it. So what do you think about that? Mm,
Yeah, well, I mean, not every when it comes to our business, no one's ever gonna no issue's ever gonna be sort of like universally accepted. Um,
mm,
I'm a big believer in with our industry in general. I'm a big believer in sort of the rising tide raises all ships
mm,
philosophy. I think that when you have more exposure and more um mainstreaming of our product, that's better for the industry as a whole.
mm,
And I think that we have a small industry in terms of how many people are actually sort of like in the industry, how many organizations and companies. The dollar amount that gets thrown around is pretty big, but the actual industry is pretty tight and pretty small. And so I think that you know, the same retailers that have these feelings, I'm sure are probably the same retailers who also did not like that the internet started selling products either.
Hmm.
Um, and I just don't, I think that's a really old way of thinking. I don't think it's beneficial for the industry as a whole. I had said earlier about the pandemic that if someone had not bought a product before from our industry, that during the pandemic they did. And I think that when you buy your first item in this industry, when you first come into into this industry, I don't really think you leave. I think we kind of have customers for life. I think I don't, some better than others, but I think that you're gonna buy more product, you're gonna buy in different categories, and you're gonna explore this industry. You're not gonna stop buying vibrators or sex toys or butt plugs or any of this stuff, just like overnight. You're going to continue buying it. So if someone is introduced to this industry via a mainstream store, like a supermarket or a Walmart over here, um, for me, I think that's great because um, I'll take a customer any way I can get them.
Great. I think it's a good thing as well, because it's just like reaching more and more people, and it makes it just normal, like the act of masturbation, which is my next question. Because I think when you filled in the calendar, you talked about masturbation and orgasms being part of self-care. Do you think that's always been the perception or the goal? Because I see that very much. So I want to promote kind of orgasms and masturbation as something that's like part of self-love, a self-love practice, and that it's important to have that. It's good for body positivity and just intimacy if you're in a couple. Was that something you've always believed?
Yeah, I mean it's yeah, I mean it's well, if you want to take the pleasure products, I said that it kind of ended with pleasure products, but to be honest with you, what you're saying right now is it points to where I'm wrong and or where I misspoke because it really evolved from pleasure products to sexual health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And that is kind of where the industry is right now is we are really promoting the idea that what we do is not just fun. What we do is actually good for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's medically now accepted and there has been enough research on this where orgasms and sort of self-love or partner love that actually achieves orgasm is good for your mind, your body, and your spirit. And so there is a big part of what we do now and that is really legitimately categorized as sexual health and wellness. And that is the furthest thing that you could get from sort of like the toy world,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Um, so yeah, I think that's a big part of it for us as well. I mean, a lot of times, one of the other things that we do really well as a company and is a big, big, big part of our business, and again, this is because we are a manufacturer, is we do a lot of private labeling. We make a lot of product for other people in this industry. People who want to make, product very specifically for one type of category. And a lot of the things that people come to us with these days are, very centered around sexual health and wellness
Right.
and
Well,
really marketing and really creating an atmosphere where this isn't just mainstream or accepted, but it's sort of even beyond that. Like this is actually something that your body needs and that you will receive benefit from. No
definitely.
different than I'm staring at a jar of powder supplement that I take every day,
Mm-hmm.
here on my desk. That they've marketed to me 100 reasons why this is good. And I've done my research to know that the stuff in here is good and helps me with certain things in my life. And that's what we're doing as well.
Definitely. One tendency that I've noticed over the years, because I've been in this industry for 14 years, but prior to that, I was also a user. But I've noticed that the toy envy thing has reduced a lot. Like, for example, a lot of people would say to me, "Oh, don't your boyfriends feel intimidated or jealous of your toys?" or even men themselves getting kind of feeling intimidated, or that it's replacing a person. I think nowadays attitudes have really changed, and people are kind of embracing toys as part of, or pleasure products as part of like a healthy relationship. Would you say that's similar? Would you say that you've noticed that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I have a group of guy friends that they grew up with me and they didn't,
Mhm.
probably one by one did I get them into using. It's not like they were already past even that. They still had the barrier of like, oh, well, I mean, I know you make sex toys, but like, I don't need them in my relationship.
Mhm.
Anyone that's ever happened to me, whether it's genuinely guy friends of mine or girlfriends of mine that want me to talk to their husbands or their boyfriends or whatever, I always say the same thing, which is like, you have no idea how much easier I am going to make your life and sort of like how much better I'm going to make your sex life, because, a lot of, I think what guys get hung up on is this idea of like replacement or better than.
Mm.
And, I always try to sort of reframe it where I'm just like, you know, are what is your goal here? Right? Because like, is your goal to make sure that your partner, has an orgasm and feels as good as possible during this experience? Because like, if that is the goal, then I think using a product is going to make your life a lot easier,
Mm.
and once they sort of understand that and do actually start to use the products, I think they're never going back.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, because I think you can see how much better the experience can be. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's a much easier conversation, or it's a conversation I have a lot less these days. I
Yeah.
used to have that conversation a lot where people would tell me like, I want to use my vibrator, but like my boyfriend or, whatever it is. And I don't have that conversation too much anymore.
And I got my first vibrator. Some of my female friends are like, oh, I've got a boyfriend, I don't need that kind of thing. And you wouldn't really think that now. It's very different. And I think now, because the toys are less phallic, I do think that influences things because people are kind of, there's more like suction toys or external stimulators. And
Yeah.
I think that makes a difference. It's
Well,
not
there's just, I mean,
clunky.
everything now is just every shape and size. There's so much beautiful
Mm,
product out there and
mm,
stuff that's, so discreet and, and, so easy to use,
mm.
and so easy to use in the bedroom. And so many couples toys too, One of our best-selling items, when I mentioned that Optimal line, is we have a vibrating C ring in that line, and that's one of our best-selling items.
Yeah.
And it's a great, great, great item for a guy to use. He gets some stimulation for it, but there's also a vibration that the woman gets to experience as well.
Great. A couple of quick questions I ask everyone. What's the book that changed your life? Do you have a book? Do you read?
Oh God.
Or any
A
time of your
book.
life, any a book that you thought,
I'm gonna be
wow.
honest, not as much as I should, and I've
Uh-huh.
taken to audiobooks.
Okay.
I've taken to audiobooks because especially with kids, I've realized that I can get I'm looking for the information or I'm looking for the experience, and that's a way that I know that I can sort of like get it in versus if I'm trying to carve out a half hour or an hour for myself, like at the end of the day, to like sit down and read a book, then it's probably not going to happen. And there was a period of time there where I wasn't getting sort of any books into the brain at all. So I've kind of taken to, audiobooks lately. Um, One that I will say changed my life. I'm bad at this because I only think of things in the last like couple of years instead of
Mhm.
like maybe something that I read when I was like in high school. Trying to see if I can get you the title of this book, but it was basically a book that was written. It's about parenthood, though. It's just about
Okay.
like a philosophy in terms of like how to raise young babies into toddlers into, functioning adults. And it was like, it's a philosophy, sort of like the REI philosophy,
Hmm.
the RIE philosophy. It's no bad kid, I think it is, or there's no bad child.
Okay.
Um, I would say that is, if you're going to ask me that question right this second, yeah, it's No Bad Kids by Janet Lansbury. Um, I think that's probably a book that, in terms of the way that I parent, which is one of the most important things that I do, kind of changed my outlook, or at least formed the foundation for like kind of the type of parent I wanted to be.
Amazing. What about which phrase, affirmation, or quote do you live by? Do you have any sayings that you think this is how I live?
Oh God, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to know the answers to all these questions the minute I hang up on this Zoom. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything I live by.
Okay. So how can people find you? Or
Oh,
Doc
let's see.
Johnson?
I mean, yeah, Doc Johnson. We're Doc Johnson USA on Instagram. I want to make sure that's right because no one will give us Doc Johnson on anything. People like stole our name,
Oh no. So what was the name? What's
and like
behind the name
nobody.
then? Is there a story behind the name?
Oh, so I mean, yeah, I think so. I don't know. This is the story that Ron tells. I don't. It's a funny story. I don't know if it's 100% true, but I think it might be. Um, when the company was first getting started, back to the Merrill aids where this conversation started. Johnson was the one of the second or third most popular surname in the world, and the idea of like Doc, sort of like your friendly kind of neighborhood Doc, not like Doctor Johnson, but
Hmm.
like this sort of more feeling more comfortable, like Doc Johnson. Like there was this idea of like this sort of like person that could help. And Johnson was a very universally recognized name. And Doc was short for doctor in a little bit more of a friendly, approachable way.
Okay.
And those two things got put together, and here we are.
Fantastic. Very interesting. So we'll be checking out
So
your.
yeah, so we're Doc Johnson USA on Instagram, and you can find us at docjohnson.com. And I believe we are the original Doc on Twitter.
Okay.
I have all this stuff written down somewhere.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. It's been amazing. It's gonna stop.